Now, what is the Tech Talent Charter? About 11 companies of you in the room have already heard of us and are already members. Don't worry, I'm not trying to sell you something that costs money. This is something that's come about. The Tech Talent Charter came about because 2 years ago, 18 months ago, at an event like this, I had someone speaking to us. It's Sinead Bunting. And she got very, very excited about doing something about diversity in tech. And she brought a few of us from that space. There was Amali from Code First Girls. There was someone from Stimettes, and said we really should do something about diversity in tech, particularly women. And from someone like myself, I used to run a charity called Apps for Good. We had great success with young people. We worked with about 75,000 kids, of whom half were female, teaching them how to build apps, to be entrepreneurs, and to code and build apps. So I found myself in a lot of these discussions and roundtables. So my first comment was, I'm glad to help. If we have to do another roundtable event of are there enough women in tech, my head will explode. If I have to go to another event where we got terribly excited and all build something that somebody's already done before, my head will explode. As long as you promise that we're not going to do those two things, I'm in. So really the principles behind what we're trying to do, this is a growing number, you'll see how much we're growing in a few minutes, of people in this ecosystem. This is employers. Now these are employers, when I say tech, I mean the broadest sense of tech. I mean any company who needs tech to survive. So I swear, I'm sure there's about 3 companies in the UK that doesn't involve, but I've not met them yet. So we have a great vertical in terms of tech companies, but we've also got BBC, we've got Sky, we have Eurostar, we have Accenture, I know you're in the room. We have Domino's Pizza, okay? We have Domino's Pizza. We've got startups, we've got SMEs, we've got not-for-profits. We also have recruiters. Because if we're going to tackle this issue, recruiters can be part of the solution or the problem. This is why I've loved working with women in tech. I've loved having what you guys are doing on Techno Jobs and having you part of this. You're putting the word out to your employers and doing this. We come together because what we're saying is this is so utterly broken. So broken. And we'll talk about this as we go on. No single company can fix it by themselves. All right? This is a broken and leaky pipeline. Those of you who are standing outside the universities with your bucket to catch all the shiny graduates are finding not much is coming out. That's because we don't have enough women going in. They're not staying on. Even if you catch them in your bucket and run to your company and put them in, there's lots of leakage outwards, etc. So if your company is trying to come up with great ideas and then treat them like the great trade secret, you're just buying a really, really shiny, expensive fishing rod. And then you're going and fishing in the same leaky barrel that everybody else is. So what we said is we've got to work together. Work with government, work with employers, work with people who are doing stuff in the space. Stop reinventing the wheel. Start creating things together. So to join is really, really simple. We've tried to keep everything really, really simple because the thing we do is really, really hard. All right? So companies are committing to the whole piece. It is about attraction. What happens when girls are as young as 10? It is how we are recruiting. It is how we are retraining and retaining our women throughout this workforce. We don't say there's a one-size-fits-all. I don't have a required step-by-step process that you sign up to. We keep it really, really simple, but we will measure. So when I say that, I boil that down. You can see it on the website. What I say is, if you want to join Tech Talent Charter, dead simple. There are the 4 things: people, plan, practice, and data. Companies join and they have a named senior signatory. This is really important, and a lot of you know this. If you don't have someone at the top of your company who is saying publicly, this is important and matters for our company, but internally is sponsoring to help you make things happen, you don't get off the ground. You've got to get that senior buy-in. We say that you have to have a plan. Now, if you're a company that has been doing this for 10 years, your D&I plan may be 10 pages, really, really sophisticated. If you're a startup that's just trying to get it off the ground, that might be 3 things you're working on this year. I don't say what your plan has to look like, but you got to have a plan. I know that's pretty obvious, but you'd be amazed the number of companies that haven't tried to really talk internally about having a plan. Practice. This is where the magic comes. All of our members are doing just what you're doing here. sharing what's working and what's not working, honestly and openly. So Tuesday morning, I was in mostly sunshiny Newcastle. I should say Gateshead to anyone in the Northeast. I just did a first faux pas. We were in Gateshead at the Baltic with about 80 people in the room. Something was sponsored by Accenture, Sage, Adam Bank, and we were focusing on retention. And everyone in the room was throwing out ideas and coming up with a way that in the Northeast they might work together to try and retain great talent in the Northeast. And then we capture that and we share it all across the board. So some of what I'll talk about in a few minutes comes out of what we did on that day. Now, companies by this time are nodding and smiling, and then I say the next bit and it freezes. And there's a little bit of an intake of breath because it's data. And if you don't do anything else today, if your company's not carefully capturing data across this whole piece, how do you know if it's working or not? How do you know really where your problem is? When they start gathering data is when we start having companies say, you know what? We thought we were doing just fine, but we realized that we're great on recruiting, but we're losing them at between 3 and 5 years. Or we're not getting our middle managers. Or we're finding, one company's aha moment was, do you know what? When we stopped doing shortlisting by phone interviews, our retention of women onto that shortlist went up by 25%. It's the data that gets careful. Now, what we do as Tech Talent Charter is we have a data set you can find out online that scares companies to death. It's everything from number of female employees, number of women on a short list, it's gender pay, it's policies in relation to that. What we do with that is not to name and shame. It's not a league table. What it means is by Christmas, I'll be publishing a national benchmarking report. So for the first time, companies can sit down and say, okay, this is much worse than we thought. We're much worse off than other companies. We got to paddle faster here. But others can say, okay, this is okay, we're keeping. Now, how do we get to the top of that pack? When this happened, it was our determination. What I knew when we started out was when people came to me, I was rudely, while I was at the table, sending an email to someone because they said, wouldn't it be great if you had an accreditation scheme on diversity? And I can say, we don't have to. There's already one put out by a group called WISE, a not-for-profit. When another company is saying to me, really, we want to do something about young people, inspiring girls, I can say, fantastic. What you need to look at is hashtag #TechSheCan, companies coming together to look at how to really inspire young people. Look, people are already writing these down. You can find all the things on the website. But it is these sorts of things to bring people together. If we're going to fix it, we've got to accept too often companies are just starting there, aren't we? I know what we can do. We'll do some unconscious bias training, good. We'll tweak our job descriptions, tick, good. And we'll put it on 3 different job sites, and that'll be done, won't it? And nothing happens. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results. That's because we've got to look broader. This is why when we do our regional events, each of them has a different strand. We did something in Oxford that focused on recruitment, and in particular for SMEs and startups, because it's a different kettle of fish than what we do with the big companies. When I was on Tuesday in Newcastle, what we looked at is retention. Once we have them, how do we keep them? What are the things that we can do to retrain? We're going to look at growing. On the 3rd of July, I'll be up in Manchester. I hope it's sunny. What we're going to be talking about, how can we retrain? How can we get returners? How do we broaden that front open door and make it a revolving door so we can get more women through? If you hear nothing else that I'm saying today, look there, okay? But if we're going to do that, we also have to talk about, but how can we be helping? Research shows that young people don't choose a career as young as age 10, but at age 10, they begin ruling out careers. So if you're putting all of your energy in on, we're going to talk to our A-level students, too late, love, okay? They've already made their choices. They've already started ruling things out. So there's great initiatives going on that go across that whole piece. And it's worth getting in there, getting those conversations and working those things through. Every time I've done a piece with people, we talk about you can tweak your retention, and you can even get, have you ever been in a company where you do get that really, really great person in, and they last about 9 months, and they're out? Or maybe that you notice that they stay for 18 months and they drop out. Have you also seen, we only have to look in the paper what's happening in some really big companies, of some very angry people, some very angry men about what is this diversity in tech malarkey. Culture. Culture is your starting point, your midpoint, your end point. If you don't really start working at the same time as tweaking your introductions and your recruitment, if you're not addressing that culture piece, you're not going to keep, you're not going to grow, you're not going to retain the right caliber treatment. Now, this is doing this with people, not to people. If you're not having your companies already starting on that journey on unconscious bias training, how many of you have already started doing some work on unconscious bias? Good. Now, what I would say is this. Unconscious bias, I was at an event yesterday where they're talking about, they sort of demystified. Aren't there some of us that don't have unconscious bias? If anyone says that to you, that's because they're unconscious, okay? The way the brain is wired, that there is no way all of our decision-making can remain conscious. I mean, I couldn't decide whether to have coffee or tea if I didn't have already an unconscious bias. That's our brain's tendency. So the great thing is the companies that are doing work on unconscious bias, but it is at all levels, okay? This is all the way through. And it's also understanding when you start doing that training on unconscious bias, it's not like a vaccine. I've unconsciously biased you now, and you may go forth and you will be an inclusive and diverse employer from now on. Where I've seen the companies that have done some really good work is they carry it on as a part of a whole conversation throughout the company from day one and onwards. I heard one company talk about they did the unconscious bias training. Then they came back together as a team, having worked on it, to come up with tick lists to help each other on interview processes, to come back later to talk about how they can use that to communicate through the piece. Those unconscious bias pieces, that talking about why we're doing and what we're doing, taking people on the idea that this is not a zero-sum game. By trying to get more women in tech, that is not because I'm taking a job away from you as men. We have empty posts. This is not because we're doing it to you and it is going to be done to you. There's some fantastic stats out there around how getting diversity right affects the bottom line. We can show you stats where it increases your bottom line, your ability to move into new sectors, your ability to sustain disruption within the piece. The more we get people to see and to understand that, yes, this is about bringing in women, but it's also then looking at how we bring along other kinds of people. Quite often when we even talk about the men in the sector, we're only talking about one kind of man in the sector, aren't we? Okay? We're not getting that whole range of things. Culture is also not just the policies, but how they walk the walk. So how many of you are in companies that are beginning to talk about things like flexible working, family-friendly, parental leave? Don't worry, I want you to just raise your hands. How many of you are doing that? How many of you have men taking that up as well as women? Good, not as many hands. How many of you have it going all the way up to senior level as well as the bottom? And how many of you probably know in your heart of hearts, and this is Chatham House while I'm talking, okay? We're not quoting companies. How many of you know that you got middle managers that still don't get it? And eyebrows go up. Okay? Really interesting thing. That same statistic where I said that there was 58%, I read this on the airplane as I've been going all over the country, 58% of women in a survey were considering changing jobs. One of the main reasons was flexibility. Okay? If you can change that, but what's interesting, whenever I talk about flexible working and whenever I'm talking about family-friendly working, the women nod openly, but they're frustrated because it hurts job chances, but the men come up to me quietly and say, you know what, we really need that for men too. Until we create that new norm, and that's where you need to have your discussions. This is why you need that senior signatory bought into it, but it's about having those discussions and myth busting. Okay? It's about myth-busting what flexible working really looks and feels like. It's about myth-busting about how do we measure productivity. It's about myth-busting that when people are working flexibly from home, it's not because they're out in the sunshine and having a G&T a bit early. It's about really understanding what that means in terms of retention, what that means in terms of productivity, loyalty to the brand, increase in creativity that goes through, and you're not just going to keep women. There's studies that show that's what millennials are looking for too, Okay? So again, if your company has really not gone down that road, and if you're doing it, do you remember to mention it during recruitment? Okay, because that's another thing. A number of people that will say, oh yeah, we've got great flexible working, lots of people work from home, etc. Do you have that out there in your job descriptions? Are you actively promoting that as part of your culture? Because getting your culture right and taking people with you, and then are you telling the story? A lot of you are in brands and companies that it's really hard to get noticed, okay? It's great if you're a Google or a Twitter or a Spotify, but if you're the company where we have to say, and what is it you do again? Do you have tech in that company? So what are you doing about talking about telling the story of your brand? Telling what this means about how you are open, how you are inclusive, how this is different from the place down the road makes a huge difference for what we're looking at in women. What if you approached changing your recruitment and retention of women like a startup? Get a proposition, user test it. Test the user journey all along the piece. Get user feedback. Do some A/B testing. See which one works. Tell your company, we're going to try something. We don't know if it's going to work, and we need your feedback. Treat it like a startup. If it's about retention, your users are your people. How often are we doing things in relation to diversity that we do to people, not with people? And I'm not just talking about women-only groups. I'm not just talking about the diversity group. I'm talking about taking the whole company on. I had one SME who was talking to us and saying, we're really scratching our heads trying to figure out, it's really hard for the support team to think about flexible learning. We're not sure how to do it. I said, have you asked the team? And he went, my God, no, we haven't. And I said, well, there's an idea. Take people with you and do little and often. Try something small and grow it out. Take a pilot group and go that out. Take the company with you, even when you're a big name brand. I know big name brands like shiny and perfect, but if we're going to make a difference in this respect, it is about taking something small and then building it out, however imperfect, and then learning from everyone else.